Hi, welcome everybody to the Be Your Own Hero podcast. I am your host, Brittany Renew, fantasy author and entrepreneur. I am really excited to have a friend on today who is also a fellow author and entrepreneur. So, Michael Tennant here is with us. He is the CEO of Curiosity Lab, as well as an empathy expert. And his book, The Power of Empathy, released in the fall of 2023. I'm going to hold it up here. I love this cover. So we're going to dive into his work with empathy today. And he also has this really cool card game. And I've got two decks with me here as well. Here we go. So the Actually Curious card game. And it's been featured on a lot of major news outlets like the Today Show, New York Times, just to name a few. So I'm excited to dive in. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's just give everyone some background of kind of like, where you started your journey with empathy and, what led you to this point today.
Yeah, well, first of all, I am a proud Pinellas County, Florida resident
Yeah.
now, and loving it, loving growing my community. I am natively from New York by way of Jamaican parents. My background before becoming a quote unquote empathy expert was 15 years in media and advertising. I worked for MTV and Vice Media, and then for some of the biggest brands in the world, like P&G and Coca-Cola. I left corporate America to start a purpose-driven company called Curiosity Lab. And before the midterm elections of 2018, we happened to create a game to try to help bring our country together. And that sent me down this path that has led to this life now, where I've gotten to study empathy, write about empathy, and teach it at places like NASA and Stanford and just some wonderful for profit businesses, government, and education organizations across the world.
That's so cool. And that you naming some of those places, it makes me want to ask, like, what's been your coolest company so far that you've been able to do empathy work at?
Um, Well, I'll just, there have been a lot of cool places, but the two that jumped to my mind first were fairly recent. I did a workshop at Chanel, and their offices
Mhm.
are beautiful and
I
super
imagine
chic.
so.
And I once did an empathy workshop for the marketing team at Lincoln Financial Group, which brought me to the Eagles Stadium, where I did a workshop with my face on big jumbotrons.
That had to be an experience.
Sure was. Sure was.
That's really cool. So I like to say I've heard this phrase. I'm not the one who came up with it, but I've heard it said many times. You're best equipped to serve the person that you once were. And I'm just curious, why is empathy so important to you?
Yeah. Well, like I said, we happened into creating the conversation game Actually Curious. And it was, I think one thing that's really big for me is I really tried to be within my integrity. And in 2018, we realized that we were talking to organizations and pitching them on consulting to help them make sure that they were living their values. And we didn't know ours, and
Mm,
we weren't we didn't know ours, so we certainly weren't purposely living them. When we did the same sort of consulting work that we did for others on ourselves, the tactical output of the project that came out of it was the original the original Actually Curious, which
okay.
has four levels in it,
Okay.
which allow you to start light and then level up as you build trust and confidence. Now, the funny thing is as I was creating the game, that was, you know, almost 8 years ago, I wasn't very comfortable with opening up. I wasn't comfortable with discussing important topics in groups. Um, in even worse so, a lot of my friends, we were just like gamer nerds who were into design and into advertising. So we really took that insight into creating a game that would give people like us a chance at actually opening up. So the gamification rules in it, if you read the rules, the way you play it is everyone reads a question. I read a question, everyone answers, and then I award a card to the answer that I think is best and a point to the answer that I think is best. And then that person gets to pick the next card. So they get control. All
Mm.
aspects that, now that I'm a lot more self aware, aspects that insecure people like. They like to win. They like a gamification
Yeah.
element rather than just having to dive into um, uncomfortable conversations, vulnerable conversations. So that's one part. In 2019, sadly, I lost two of my older brothers. One in July of that year, he was my closest relative. And then 3 months later, I lost another brother. And the 3 months in between, I had to navigate how to show up for my parents, how to show up for myself. Quite frankly, when I lost my first brother, Chris, he was the anchor to like my self knowing, my self confidence, my joy. And then it highlighted a bigger blind spot that I'd been escaping through emotions, through substances, through work, through romantic relationships, just a battery of ways of never really having to deal with um, difficult emotions, like a strained and challenging relationship with my parents. Very loving parents, but the way that they loved me, in some ways, um, kept me small and made me insecure in other ways. So, frankly, the work around empathy first came to save me,
Mm.
to help me learn how to be with challenging emotions in myself, in a healthy way. So I'm not literally killing myself with stress and chemicals and disconnection in a
Yeah.
more abstract way, but also to show up for my parents and now my 8 nieces and nephews who were left without a father. So then when the pandemic hit, um, and I'd say my biggest challenge during the pandemic was I was actually living at home with my parents. I was committed now to just going deeper into exploring healing, exploring how, when one is able to heal and learn coping mechanisms, they actually have greater capacity for inconsistencies or volatility within the individuals they meet or even within their ecosystem. When the pandemic hit and there was now volatility all around, I was practicing these tools at home. And I'd say the biggest challenge I had was explaining to my parents, my loving parents, my first generation American immigrant parents, explaining to them that I was really going to continue pursuing empathy. I was going to continue pursuing getting this conversation game that opened this window for me, getting that to wider audiences, and that was scary for them. That was not, and I think a lot of parents of previous to the millennial generation who experience entrepreneurship, but not to the breadth that our generations after us are,
Yeah.
just find it threatening to let that go. So yeah, that was a really keen question, Brittany. The work that I now teach in empathy actually came to save me and to keep me focused on my purpose, which I was finding was actually helping me to replace this happiness that came from outside of me,
Mm.
um, with happiness that could spring from continuing to return to my values and listening to what made me feel safe and whole.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in, you just go through the motions in life and you never slow down enough to really think about what is important to you, what's the value system, for you personally. And when you do the work to understand that, then you can pursue things and move in a way that's going to stay true to yourself and ultimately going to get you to a much better place in life versus feeling like you're always doing what other people want you to do. So that's, yeah, that's, it's really cool to hear you talk about how like the empathy, going deeper into that really saved you. And then now you're able to then in turn help others because you took the time to work on yourself first.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, I think, this work in empathy, and we can talk about, more what it looks like when I teach it and why people even would, hire me
Mm-hmm.
to teach empathy within their organizations. But something that's really present for me right now is, um, we've been in challenging economic times. Um, Empathy, as I have articulated it over the last 4 years, has been really adjacent to the diversity, equity, and inclusion movements that
Mm-hmm.
have spurred up and grown and receded subsequently over the last 4 years. So I've
Yeah.
faced some challenging times as an entrepreneur, and I luckily, have faced more challenging times as a human. That it actually makes me a more resilient entrepreneur to return back to the tools and processes that help me to survive loss. Which, I think the key insight that made me realize, hey, I got to spread these tools is the empathy that I received, realizing that we were all going to lose someone at some point.
Mm.
And like, I lost my brothers prematurely. I still have my parents. In some ways, they have cushioned me for now understanding what it would potentially, eventually be like
Mm.
for me to lose my parents, or uh, the cards fall as they may. Maybe, for understanding the suffering, if someone were to, if my family were to lose me prematurely. These are heavy topics, but um, I now have a facility of talking about it, visiting it. It doesn't mean it doesn't scare me. It doesn't make me sad. It doesn't sometimes make me angry and want to run away. All of those things, but I have learned how to stay with it more often in a grounded place. Now imagine if all of us could find the areas, the topics that were scariest for us, and be able to have discussions about it responsibly.
Yeah.
You know, that was the ambition. And for me, that meant, well, if we need to talk about race, then it might get heated. But if we have the tools, then we can talk about it. And at least if we have the tools, if I lose it a little bit, maybe you've got it and you can hold the container together and we can repair. If we need to talk about gender or sexuality, if we need to talk about the economy, I haven't done it as much as I would like, but if we need to talk about differing politics,
Yeah. Yeah, the polarizing topics. but that's but that's awesome though to think about, you know, how we can have these hard conversations together and still be kind to one another because I think that's something that's missing in our society as a whole is not being able to, you know, have conversations where we don't agree on everything but still have love and respect and kindness for each other, because at the end of the day there's always a path, there's always some way forward together. I think that, you know, we may not agree on everything but we can find areas where we do agree. If we keep, you know, if we keep talking we'll get there, you know.
yeah,
And then that's the beauty of the card game of what you're talking about, being able to use, you know, being able to use this as a tool to have some of those conversations. I love that. That's very cool.
yeah. I think what I've learned over time, and I think maybe I didn't even know it when we created the conversation game, is that confronting challenging conversations is harder before it becomes easier. There's almost a progression where a topic or an area is is like so hard that we don't even want to look at it. Actually, like our brains are so effective at
Yeah.
protecting us from this thing that feels, or this idea, or this word, or this imagined interaction that like we sometimes we won't even think about it. It won't even come up in conversation. We're
Yeah.
like ninjas about it. So like we go from like extreme ability at avoidance to I don't want to touch this. This is so hard to overcome. To oh my god, I'm here. This feels really uncomfortable. Why am I here? Why am I here? To that's not so bad. To that's easy. To damn, I did that.
Yeah.
Wow. To to wonder. Um, and sadly, so that wonder is so very powerful and so worth it, and so like an inanimate ambrosia, if you will. But to get there, you have to walk through the wilderness.
Hmm.
So I guess that kind of is the storytelling challenge, and why we put actually curious in cute boxes, and the power of empathy and
Yeah.
like a pretty cover, and I come up with pithy words like the 5 phases of empathy to try to get people through the wilderness and
Yeah.
to the ambrosia.
Yep. Like you said, gamify it. That's always going to help people get through the hard stuff. So I love that. I would love for you to share kind of what's the framework that you put together for these workshops when you're going to speak at these corporations, or when actually how we met was a workshop that a local bookstore, Book and Bottle, that we love, in St. Pete, that they hosted. You did your workshop there, and that's where we met. um, and it was so cool. It was so unique. I've never experienced anything like that. I mean, we got together in groups and asked each other questions from the different cards, and I can attest to it. Some of it felt very uncomfortable, but by the time we got to the end of it, it was like, oh, I did all that. I had those conversations with, I was with two girlfriends, and we had some really cool conversations. So yeah, I would
Mm.
love for you to dive into what does that look like.
And some strangers too, right?
Yes, yes, that's true. Yeah, we did do. Yeah, got into partners with stranger, which is more uncomfortable than with the friends. Yes.
Well, I just got hit with this wonderful idea to put it in the context of being your own hero. So the model is called the 5 phases of empathy, and the progression to developing it was really organic. The inspirations come from probably organically from studies in philosophy and religion, to active work in therapy and mindfulness and learning to meditate, and learning about self love, and ways that I could, once I lost my brothers, Chris and Darren, actually heal, repair, install new mechanisms that allow me to continue on a path of pursuing my happiness, and in
Mm,
doing, being prepared and resilient for the next challenge where I need to support, which I was finding that, once I got through the wilderness of taking care of myself, and showing up in uncomfortable situations to support others in my family, I started to realize, wow, it feels good to be this
mm,
trusted support, and to be able to trust myself to be there. So the 5 phases of empathy. It starts with phase one, the language of feelings. And the language of feelings gives a shared lexicon on empathy. The key, which are the 3 types of empathy: cognitive empathy, somatic empathy, and affective empathy. But the key thing that I lean into is the somatic empathy piece.
mm,
And I teach people uh, the 5 core emotions, which the reason we do so is so that you can easily start to label and get into a habit of noticing and labeling with a simple rubric. So the 5 core
mm,
emotions, which are joy, fear, anger, shame, and sadness. And so that somatic empathy piece is the ability to actually feel our emotions. Our bodies send us a signal like, hey, this emotion is here, through a physical sensation before our brains go, okay, and I know what that is. And so in phase one, and a key game changer for me in my healing was when I would notice my emotions like sadness, um, as tears or as heat, and maybe even interrelating with like anger, and learning how anger might show up to protect my sadness, and but just getting more attuned to noticing how the emotion showed up in my body and labeling it. I became more effective at choosing what I wanted to do, or at least getting curious and slowing down that process, and not just flying off into that emotion. So phase one was noticing, and labeling my emotions. Phase two, and just cliffhanger. Here I am today teaching emotions. I've transformed my life into something that's like safer, nourishing, and I'm able to help other people. So I'm living this purpose, right? But how am I doing that? The key thing is I am translating every emotional experience that I have very intentionally into action that accumulatively delivers on my purpose. And so the next four phases are that. So in terms of being my own hero, the key thing is listening to my emotions. So phase two is the importance of intention. Now, when I was healing and or just trying to figure out how to be with those emotions of losing my brother, it was really hard. I used motion sometimes to take really intense emotions and kind of settle it and transmute it. I had a journaling practice that I was intermittent about. Um, and I had both for consulting, but also for myself, this practice of returning to values whenever things were murky, just as an anchoring place. So when I was going through my healing, and I would wake up in the mornings and I would meditate, and I would notice, man, today I've woken with a lot of sadness or like a lot of anger, and I wanted to get to a more kind of average or more grounded place. I would I would write my values and my purpose statement at the top of my journal, and then I would just let the emotions rip. And whatever was left, when I would go out and run, I would have like some of those thoughts that were on the page. I would have that in my mind as I was running. And sometimes, like, running can be quite solitary, just like writing can be. And I would curse and I would yell, and I would be like on the Manhattan Bridge, and I would just be like, fuck this. But by the end of it, there would be like a soft and gentle message that was almost like the combination of the emotions and my values, and connecting with my brothers through this process. Um, and I realized there was something really powerful about having your values as an anchor that you could use to almost translate that intuition that was coming from your emotions. So the importance of intention is really about using your values to translate your emotions into action.
I
So
love it.
phase three is channeling purpose. So again, in terms of being your own hero, it was always this like, I have had mixed emotions with some of the ways that values have been introduced by my parents, by schools, by religion. And I wanted to wrestle with what was true for me today, regardless of where it might come from. And that importance of intention helped me to at least have a model for evaluating that. So phase three is channeling purpose. So it's not enough for you to notice. It's not enough for you to translate. It's about consistency, coming, or delivering on impact on something you believe in is about that resilience. In fact, one of my values at the time was when I was able to transmute the sadness of having to survive so many different hardships, or even noticing that in my family, um, into a celebration of resilience. Like, yeah, we did that,
Yeah.
and that's a beautiful thing that you can do when you're looking at intentionally at the past. Um, but channeling purpose is really about noticing that a lot of our energy gets lost when we direct our effort towards things that are outside of our control.
Mm, yeah.
So Franklin Covey and there's a famous like consulting firm that was created through his teachings and methodologies. But
Yeah.
one of his methodologies is what's called the circle of control.
Mm,
So the way the circle of control works is there are three circles. The biggest one is your circle of concern. Circle of concern are just any input that comes into your life. There's the news. There are like your bills. There's the stress from your friends. There's just real stuff like your responsibility. Just every single input that comes into your life, right? Inside that is the circle of influence. So, if all of these inputs and all of these touch points that you have that you engage in, some of them you actually influence. You know, your boss, your subordinates, your parents, your children, your friends. Like you influence them,
mhm.
but ultimately, you may. There's a saying: you can bring a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink,
Yeah.
right? If the drinking of that horse is necessary for your purpose, then you better figure out how to bring it into the third circle, which is your circle of control, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So your circle of control is the way I like to look at it is that's my thoughts. Actually, that's the hardest part. I should have said that last. But my thoughts, my narratives, my limiting beliefs, my willingness to engage in gossip, in merging with the news or listening too much of the news, not turning that off when I've gotten too much of it. My words, how my words create a manifestation of my actions or a ripple effect or affects the people around me in a way that I could have controlled before it left.
Mhm.
And my actions, everything else, what you do, what they do after I put those things in motion, those are really outside of the circle of control. So channeling purpose really is about using the intelligence from your emotions, using the intelligence of translating that through your values, but then also creating boundaries within yourself that you put your energy towards your circle of control, what you
Mm,
can control.
yeah.
And that was so huge for me in the healing process because, um, I ended up losing my job. They let me go.
Mm,
There were days where uh, my family members were inconsistent and understandably so. The pandemic hit, you
yeah.
know, and ultimately, in some ways, I created the most emotional abundance and material abundance while navigating all of that uncertainty because of this habit.
Yeah. I can see how that would happen. That's and what learning what we can control and what we can't control is such a huge. I mean, I think that's when you can grasp that and start to lean into that. I mean, your growth just starts to soar because it's something that people and I because I used to do it. So it's like you just get caught up in all those things that you can't control and the energy drain that is. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean we've talked about, and I mean this is a good like kind of segue point or pause point, but like we've talked about becoming becoming an author and our individual journeys
Yeah.
around becoming an author. Um, and for me, I was teaching empathy skills in workshops and almost like, learning in real time how to then like manage the stress in me when I hold space for others. And I gave a workshop that was extremely physically taxing and left knots in my body
Oh wow.
and
Yeah.
uh, and migraines and the whole thing. And I didn't get very much back from the workshop group. And it
Mm.
was that point that I decided to stop teaching workshops, stop directing my energy in that way, and to write the outline for my book, The Power of Empathy. So, I claimed my energy back. And that actually is almost kind of like a bridge to the fourth phase. But um, if I recall, there was a kind of a similar chronology for you as well.
Yeah, it took me, I've told this story many times, but I finished my book in 2013 and didn't, didn't have success with querying agents and all that. And I just got completely discouraged and put it aside. And I'm a real estate agent. So I just went full on into that for all those years. And it took also the pandemic for me to really realize that writing was such a big passion of mine, and why was I letting it be a negative force in my life when it used to bring me so much joy and passion. And the reason why was because I was just holding on to the fear of what others think. Again, all those things I can't control, whether or not an agent wants to take a look at it. And that's ultimately why I decided to just pursue it on my own. And because I was tired of it being a source of fear and negativity when it had previously been such an amazing, passion of mine. And I'm so glad to have reclaimed that, and here I am.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and now that you have gone through that process of just seeing how long an emotional block kept you away from connecting to your values and your purpose,
yeah.
and away from, just kind of facing that internal discussion that allowed you to really focus on what you controlled, you've laid down that pathway, and you can repeat it in any challenge.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned resiliency earlier, and I think that is such a key part of it is, as we go through these different struggles and we learn these tools to overcome, and on the other side of that is the resiliency. And it's such an amazing feeling, and it gives, I know, speaking from experience, it gives me a lot of confidence going into the next challenge that I face in my life, because I know I've overcome, so many other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, the first three phases are internal. Even just kind of really intentionally getting through those first three phases, making sense of it, seeing my example, your example, but then starting to see like, oh wow, I can apply that. Actually, I don't even know what I want to apply it to, but I'll let my emotions tell me,
Yeah.
and then my values tell me, and then go to work on that circle of control. The next two phases are more external. And actually, I never even articulated it that way until doing that workshop that you came to,
Oh, really?
Brittany, with my friend Akash, which I think is almost like a microcosm of the fourth phase. So the fourth phase is from empathy to impact. And what that is about is starting to really get considerate about your ecosystem and how you are living your values, how you are honoring yourself and your emotions in those ecosystems. So whenever because I just have this in my head, I visualize it now, or maybe it's the slide I presented hundreds of times. But the ecosystems start with self first. What is your relationship with yourself? What kind of ecosystem are you living in? Is it a loving ecosystem? Is it a shaming ecosystem?
Mm.
Is it a fearful ecosystem? Is it a brave ecosystem? Regardless of where you are, do you feel whole in it, and that you're kind of the trajectory you're in, or does something need to shift? Because when I started to really actually experience what it felt like to feel full and grounded and joyful, and then my ego got low enough for me to see how long I was in struggle trying to get to even glimpses of this feeling. I started to see that so much of my suffering, and it was my inner thoughts, my inner narratives, my choices outside of my circle of control, my willingness to engage in gossip and to default to pointing outward versus in finding inward what I could change to make sure that I was good,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a boundary conversation. That's a boundary with self, and that's a whole masterclass within itself. I feel
Yeah.
for some of us, right? Um, present company included, depending on what it is that I'm working on. But then we start to look really thoughtfully at all the places we share our energy. It's not enough to just say, like, hey, let me be mindful of the circle of influence and the circle of concern. It's we are all, we are social beings. We exist in ecosystems, and quite frankly, our sometimes inability to engage healthily or to confront our own fears or narratives about being in community lead us to loneliness and suffering, and that's not callous. That's just cutting very quickly. Sometimes our loneliness is really about the choices we make,
Yeah.
you know but then we look at family. When I started to engage in mindfulness, one of the hardest things, and still actually when I go to visit my parents, is like, how do I keep my routine around people who have no concept of boundaries,
Yeah.
particularly with me, right? So, but even just honoring, like, hey, I have challenging times keeping this habit or keeping this routine here allows you to prepare. You have
Yeah.
to, like, be aware of that. It may mean that you need to find alone time. Maybe it's a shorter amount of time that you're able to support yourself. Maybe you're going to skip that for a couple days, so you're going to do a little bit more before and a little bit more after. I don't know. But then we get to the place where most of us spend probably at least 75% of our waking hours, not to be however you take that, but at our jobs,
Yeah.
you know? So how do we feel at our jobs? Do we do we have the Sunday scaries, or are we waking up excited? Do we feel largely excited, but there are a couple places and situations that don't feel good that actually are coloring the whole thing that I can hone in on? Maybe there's just one interaction that is making this job feel less nourishing than it could, right? But then it's like, also, what commitments have we made? I feel like I'm giving like a mini workshop here. But what commitments have we made outside of our mandatories, or the things that provide us safety? What clubs are we in? Are these things nourishing? Are these things in alignment with our purpose? Does that matter?
Mm-hmm.
If, as long as it makes us feel good, that gives us more energy to work on our purpose. So,
Yeah.
yeah, from empathy to impact is really giving you permission to run through that progression, specifically as it pertains to every place you share your time. Because part of our happiness is realizing that our time is valuable. And if we are disproportionately spending that time in places that are taking rather than giving to us, then it's going to throw off our equilibrium. And quite frankly, it's going to take away from our ability to show up well in those other spaces.
Yep. Yeah. I've learned that a lot over the past few years of, you know, it's easy to get wrapped up into people pleasing to still continue to, do something that is taking your joy or energy away. But when you set those boundaries and or make sure you give time to things that do fill your soul up, like, in my case, writing, it makes me show up as a better human, as a better, real estate agent, as a better wife, whatever those different hats are that we wear. It has me, it gives me the ability to show up as my best self when I take the time to set those boundaries, to set intention for some of those different things. And I think that's what, people can often struggle with, is just going through life. Almost get into like a zombie phase. You're just going through life, and not stopping long enough to get clear on what those intentions are and set those boundaries so that you can be your best self.
Yeah. Yeah, and my empathetic reaction to that is, you know, that is the status quo.
Mm,
Most people are kind of moving at that speed.
yeah.
And so I talked about that wilderness. It can feel awkward in you and sometimes even in that interaction to say, well, hold up. Um, this doesn't feel good. And we're going to just pause here and either talk about it or reapprise it. But the ambrosia on the other side is, what I've found um, is you don't have to take people through a master class for people to learn from you.
Mm,
Just by being consistent, just by being brave enough to walk through the wilderness and to sometimes bring people with you, they get to reap the benefits without the effort. So you can almost look at it that well. No, I wouldn't say it's without the effort, but maybe without as much effort getting started
yeah.
as you may have
Without
taken to.
without some of those pitfalls that you went through and helping them avoid some of those.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's why I started the podcast, like just, for me and for people that I have on, just sharing the journeys that we've been on and learning along the way so that hopefully someone else can take learning and, inspire
yeah,
them to action or avoid some pitfalls that we've
yeah.
experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this all kind of brings us just very organically to phase five, which is living with abundance. And on some level, it is it is the felt experience that happens when you go through your own healing, when you go through your own process of establishing, like rituals around honoring your emotions, honoring the emotions in the people and situations around you, and defaulting to that, you start to realize it feels good.
Mhm.
Teaching that feels good. So there's some really great abundance in that. But also, living with abundance is about realizing that um, it's not our natural default to believe that if we are consistently returning to our values and our purpose and listening to our intuition, that good things will unfold. Um, put another way, our natural inclination is to believe the opposite, that
Yeah.
that it takes struggle, that there's not enough. Um, Many people call that a scarcity mindset. So if you can combine the process and rituals that help you to slow down and trust yourself and to trust organically with an acknowledgement that we're living in a world that leans toward scarcity, combined, we actually, once we get through that wilderness, we actually start to see that abundance comes to us with ease.
Oh,
When we're teaching and we're speaking about things that we believe in, people find us.
mhm.
People get inspired by us. Miracles happen. People offer support that you wouldn't ever have imagined.
Mhm.
And I'm looking at the smile on your face, and I'm thinking there's probably a handful of stories that are just like hopping into your head at,
Yep.
at this time. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you don't know it's like a whole new world opens up for you when you start going down that path. And that's exactly what I have experienced in my life. So I can, yeah, absolutely I agree. It's and it's that saying, what you focus on expands. It's how our brains are wired to work. So once we start embracing that mindset of abundance, we're gonna start seeing it out there in the world and attract that back to us and attract the right people, into our lives. So,
yeah,
hmm,
yeah. So
love it.
that's the five phases of empathy. It's kept me whole so far. I'm meeting wonderful people like yourself. I'm showing up in rooms that I never imagined that I'd be in, and you know, I am, interestingly enough, accumulating more net worth than I have, even though it doesn't always feel like that on a daily basis. And so there's a bit of surrender that's still happening here,
Mhm.
and I hope some of your listeners will join in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to ask, just for anyone listening or watching that's also a writer, aspiring to publish a book, you know, what I talk about often is just being brave enough to share your story. And I think everyone has a story to share. Not necessarily that everyone wants to be a published author, but either way, I think we all have a story worth telling to inspire others. So I would love to hear, just from your journey with publishing the book, what would be some advice that you might give someone that has a story that they want to tell, and maybe they have some limiting beliefs around telling that story.
Yeah, two pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is that um, yeah, everyone can be an author. Um, a book can be short and made for social media, or it could be dense and made for scholarly consumption. You just need to define what it is that you want to put out in the world and that
Mhm.
you feel authentically capable of putting out into the world, and just go do it.
Yeah.
And done is better than perfect in this world. The second thing I would say is, if you're facing an emotional challenge getting this project going, pick up the power of empathy and place that intention in your heart and your mind as you're working through the book. The book centers largely on healing, but what I like to say in workshops is, think of this statement: I am unlocking the power of empathy towards blank. I
Mm.
am unlocking the power of empathy towards my creative pursuits.
Oh, I like that. I'm unlocking the power of empathy towards blank, whatever that is, whatever that dream that you're holding on to, or that obstacle that you feel like you can't overcome, using the power of empathy to move past that. That's really cool. I love that. I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna try that in my own life. Oh, love it.
Yeah, we could do a be your own hero workshop, and let people kind of work through their own hero's journey through the
Ooh,
five phases of empathy.
that's a great idea. Okay, I'm gonna hold you to that. We got to do that. That sounds really cool.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, the hero's journey, that's why it's such a classic, theme in fiction. Is I mean, it's obviously can be used in nonfiction too, but it's because people can relate to that, because we all go through the process of self-discovery and becoming your own hero. So I love that. Well, so just to kind of wrap up the conversation, I love I love that we went deep into the work that you do with empathy, because I feel like people can get a better understanding of what that is, and even start applying some of that stuff in their own life immediately. And then, of course, I would just implore everyone to get the book so that you can take a deeper dive to do the work. Um, I mean, this is, from a practical standpoint, that's going to help you out tremendously. And then the gamify with the card decks. I just absolutely love that. So I haven't gotten. I bought these with the intention to do these with my husband for a date night, and I haven't been able to do that yet. So it's a renewed challenge. I need to make that
You
happen.
should do the happy hour edition, and you should also get maybe the culture edition, which we just put back out.
Okay, cool. All right. So any like last thoughts, for people about empathy, and why you feel it's so important? Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I do what I do. I've dedicated to this life because I believe that empathy can help us solve some of the world's biggest problems.
Mm.
but I've been able to keep going because empathy helps me to stay resilient and just fueled by what brings me joy. And it took me, I'm 40 years old. It took me a long time to learn how to be that self-aware to optimize my choices, and this process has helped. So, um, do it for you, or do it for what you believe in, but just get going because it's gonna make your life and the life around you better.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to share your passion for empathy, and I think that we have helped everyone understand that there is power in embracing empathy and going down this path of, self-discovery. So, I encourage everyone to get the book, get the card games, and where can everyone find more about you online, your
Yeah.
social profiles? If you want to share all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing is to visit me at curiositylab.io. That's my corporate website. It links to the course and the book and the games. But as always, Actually Curious is one of the most accessible ways to get started. And you can visit and get the Actually Curious conversation games at actuallycurious.com. Thank you for your attention, everyone.
Yay. Well, thank you again for being on the show. I really appreciate you sharing all this. And thanks, everybody, for watching and listening. And like I said, go get the book, go get the card games, and connect with Michael online so you can keep encouraging yourself to pursue empathy. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Bye.